Odanak First Nation. It was here, in the 1990s, a group of self-identified Abenaki came for a cultural exchange.
When they came to our community, we welcomed them with open arms, and we taught them our culture, our language, our stories, our heritage.
Led by this man, Homer St. Francis, the Vermont group made inroads of Abenaki in Quebec.
He worked with people from Odanak. He had got agreements with chiefs.
But by the early 2000s, the exchange took a sour turn.
When we started to ask questions on who are you, how are you related to people in Odanak, how are you related to the Abenaki Nation, they had no answers.
Even today, we're being prosecuted and persecuted for being who we are, and with just an opinion, and nobody else's authority to have the, to stand in judgment of us.
Copies of Wabanaki Confederacy belts.
Now, Vermont groups are state recognized as Abenaki. They outnumber the Abenaki, based in Quebec. And leadership at Odanak is wondering who will decide the future of the Abenaki Nation.
I struggle with the fact that if we don't fight what's happening right now, my children will have to have that battle.
Woban. In the Abenaki language, this word is interchangeable. It can mean east or dawn. The Abenaki call themselves Wabanakiak, loosely translated, people from the land of the dawn. Visit the ancestral lands of the Abenaki and you can watch the sunrise in modern-day New Hampshire and set in the New York Adirondacks. But for most of the day, the sun advances over the Green Mountains of Vermont. It was mainly here the Abenaki thrived before European contact. Using the waterways, they moved as far north as Quebec and as far south as Massachusetts. They call this territory Indakana. Translation, our land.
We're going to walk down to the water there.
Rich Holshoe is part of the Elnu Abenaki tribe, one of the 4 state-recognized Abenaki groups in Vermont.
The Abenaki name for this river, the Wantastuk, translates as the river where something is lost.
Holshoe says that prior to the construction of a nearby dam, this river was home to a whirlpool, which explains how Wantastuk became river where something is lost. Although recently it became famous for something else, as where these petroglyphs were found.
If you know a little bit about petroglyphs, they are placed in certain spots for certain reasons. The symbols that are down there are responding to the characteristics of this spot.
As a result, the Elnu consider this area sacred, a place to be safeguarded.
We walk on the graves of hundreds, if not thousands, of people here every day. This building is going to be functioning as the Tribal Cultural Center.
Recently, the Elnu fundraised to buy this nearby property, a place to teach, learn, and grow their presence.
The Abenaki were basically written out of history here. And to most people's minds, they're gone and they live somewhere else.
The thing is, many Abenaki do live somewhere else, specifically in 2 southeastern Quebec communities. The largest community, Odanak, has over 2,700 members, but less than 500 people live here. Nevertheless, it serves as a cultural hub.
This is my stand. I do some traditional Abenaki soup.
Jacques Watceau is an Odanak band counselor, but on this day at the community's annual powwow, he's wearing a different hat, that of chef and entrepreneur.
We got 9 variety of beans. We got some deer meat and some fresh vegetables. We got special blend of spices, which is a family secret, and it will remain a family secret.
This corn-based soup he sells is called sagamite.
Every family in Odanak has their own variety, so this is the Watceau family variety.
Watching Watceau work his stand, it's clear he's a gregarious guy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm being serious because I'm on TV.
I know.
But bring up the topic of Vermont recognized Abenaki, and his demeanor changes.
When we started to ask questions on who are you, how are you related to people in Odanak, how are you related to the Abenaki Nation, they had no answers.
This is where a quick history lesson is in order. First, the section that most can agree on. Prior to European contact, the Abenaki were a loose collection of family bands. In the mid-17th century, Abenaki began moving en masse to Quebec to flee wars and disease. In 1700, Odanak was established. By 1800, historians say that most Abenaki had left what is now known as Vermont, moving north to Odanak. But here's where opinions began to differ. Some say Abenaki communities continued to live on in the then fledgling state of Vermont. Every June, Vermont hosts an Abenaki Heritage Weekend. For the 4 state-recognized Abenaki groups, this is an opportunity to celebrate, as well as reinforce the narrative that their ancestors never left New England, something they feel they weren't always at liberty to do.
We grew up knowing we're Indigenous and Abenaki, yes, but did we did some things together as family units, but not in the public.
What changed things was this man, Homer St. Francis. In the 70s, St. Francis helped launch the first self-identified Abenaki group in Vermont into the public eye. Located in the town of Swanton, near where the community of Missisquoi once stood, the St. Francis Sokoki Band eventually won hunting and fishing rights for their members. And while in 2007 they failed in their bid for federal recognition, they rebranded as the Abenaki Nation in Missisquoi and eventually won state recognition in 2012. But the question remains, between 1800 and 1970, why was there little to no historical record of non-Odanak Abenaki in the state?
Did we all intermix? Yeah. I mean, people intermarried. But when you say hiding, I'm just saying is we worked within our groups and we worked along our family units, and we weren't out there parading around. This is a nice place to park canoes.
For 13 years, Don Stevens has been chief of the Nulhegan Band of the Kosuk Abenaki Nation. In 2011, the Nulhegan were among the first to be officially recognized by Vermont as indigenous to the state, something that leadership in Odanak opposed from afar, after the request to testify in front of state government was denied. The reason? They weren't citizens of Vermont.
That the fact that we didn't have a voice on our traditional homelands, that we were just basically pushed aside because we were a nuisance to the whole process.
Odanak's main gripe, they say the Vermont groups haven't been transparent about their genealogy.
If you ask an indigenous individual in Canada or anywhere else, where are you from, he will tell you. He won't tell you a story, he won't tell you it's complicated.
And so I did not grow up knowing that I was Abenaki.
Odanak aren't the only ones to raise flags about the Vermont recognized Abenaki.
The main dispute is just that they're not related to who they say they are.
Daryl LaRue is an author and associate professor at the University of Ottawa. LaRue's work focuses on race shifting, a term for when a person claims an ethnicity that isn't theirs.
It means there's 6 descendants in this one record.
He recently published a paper about the 4 Vermont recognized Abenaki groups. Using a list of names the Missisquoi group provided for a federal application for recognition, he did their genealogy.
I think there are records for about 150 descendants. And then I looked at their ancestors. So I went in both directions. And the results are that their ancestors are all from Europe, except for a couple cases where people have some of the same ancestors I have. So one of them is an Algonquin woman from the 1600s.
The Algonquin ancestor LaRue shares is common amongst French Canadians. And he's not the only one. About 10 million Canadians have a small amount of Indigenous ancestry that can be traced to the same 5 to 10 First Nations women. LaRue says about 60 years of census records also paint a pretty monochrome portrait.
What you find out is that every single time, in every record where someone's race is identified, everybody is identified as white.
As for the 2007 Missisquoi federal application for recognition that LaRue gleaned the names from, the U.S. government determined that less than 1% of the membership had Abenaki ancestry.
The bear, obviously medicine. and protection.
Stephen says he was formerly a member of the Missisquoi Abenakis, but only through marriage. Now as leader of the Nulhegan, he resents Odanak's accusations.
They're not the only tribe. I mean, if you look at things historically, there were 20 Abenaki tribes throughout history, throughout New England. And so they have no ultimate authority over who is Abenaki or who isn't. So normally I wouldn't do this because Native people do not have to prove who they are.
Stevens points to a dark period of Vermont's history, not only as proof of his own indigeneity.
So if you look at my great-great-grandfather, it clearly states that Antoine had French and Indian blood.
But as reason why there was little recorded Abenaki presence in Vermont from the 1800s until the 1970s.
My family was one of the targets of this eugenics, which is public record, and the only reason why I'm sharing this.
In the early 20th century, eugenics was a practice concerned with so-called improving the gene pool of humanity. To achieve this, eugenicists encouraged techniques such as forced sterilization.
People wonder why, people go into hiding or they're not very vocal about it. Look what's happening today. We're under attack today, just like our ancestors were under attack previously. The difference is they were being sterilized.
So who are the real people of the Don?
To have an ancestor from 14 generations ago does not make you a indigenous individual today. They played on the fact that you just had to feel it in your heart, but that's not how you become an Indian. If I like rice and Bruce Lee movies, that does not make me Chinese.
Perhaps more importantly, who gets to decide?
I have enough people that recognize me as being Abenaki. My mother and my grandmother made me Abenaki. So I'm saying is I don't have to listen to what other people's opinions are.
And in the end, who gets to steward these lands of the rising dawn? Coming up after the break, a deeper dive into Vermont's eugenics movement and a philosophical debate on ancestral memory.
To me, it comes down to a very simple argument, which is a little bit terrifying, that being indigenous is a bit like having a credit card or a can of Campbell's soup. It has an expiration date on it.
Well, I can only water down a glass of milk so much until you got a glass of water.
For the Abenaki, the black ash tree is sacred. It's also endangered.
I'm opening the safe. This is a place where we store the black ash.
Black ash wood is so precious, Chief Rick Obomsawin keeps Odanak's supply in a vault.
This is the ash after it's been pounded and already been taken off.
A creation story describes the tree's history with the Abenaki as literally intertwined.
The Creator created the world. It was a beautiful place. There was flowers, there was plants. It was just a beautiful place. But there was no sound. There was no one to enjoy it. The Creator thought, how do I create something beautiful? A beautiful people that can roam and dance and sing. He looked at his ash tree and he thought, wow, this is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's blowing in the wind. It's like it's dancing. So he breathed life into the ash tree and created the Elnaba, the Abenaki people. And to this day, we still dance and sing along the ash trees.
The black ash also serves a practical purpose. Strong and pliable, the core of the tree can be beat until long splints peel off. These splints are used to make something the Abenaki are famous for: baskets.
When I was young, over here in the village, everybody made baskets. And so my mom was making baskets and we had to help a little bit.
Annette Nolette has come a long way from those days. Now, she is considered Odanak's master basket weaver.
I'm looking at my aunt, my great-grandma, my grandma, and uncles. And they're in Vermont selling their baskets. They're beautiful. My mom used to make this by the dozen.
From 1870 to 1920, Abenaki baskets were a huge part of Odanak's economy, allowing them to offset the loss of hunting land to encroaching settlers.
It's not written who made it most of the time, but people could recognize it because of how they were weaving the basket and different shapes of the baskets. And so it was their own signature included. So this is
Susie Obamson works at the Abenaki Council. She says that many Abenaki in Quebec kept in touch with their ancestral lands by returning every summer to make sales.
These people always came back to the community over winter time. They were doing the basket, they were telling stories in the community, they were sharing what happened, they were telling like, oh, I met that family or that other family.
The legacy of the trade can still be seen in certain areas of New England today, and has also fed into questions of, if there were Abenaki groups in Vermont the whole time, why didn't they connect with basket makers from Odanak?
At no point in time, or very on rare occasions, they said that they met people they didn't know on the territory that were speaking Abenaki or that were referring to themselves as Abenaki.
This is from the 1926, started the eugenics program on my family.
Many of the Abenaki recognized by Vermont explained their absence from the 20th century public record as the cost of survival. They say they went underground to avoid forced sterilization. Stephen says that his grandmother went to great lengths to hide her identity.
She was born as Lillian May, and she got married as Pauline and died as Delia because she was affected. My uncle even mentioned that she went to live with an aunt of hers to avoid it in DC.
I have just opened up my records.
Richard Whitting is a graduate student at the University of Vermont. His thesis is researching people who were sterilized as a result of the Vermont eugenics movement.
I've never seen any big smoking gun file on where the eugenics survey or the law targeted Native Americans or Abenaki.
So this is an example of the sterilization certificates.
Whitting says he's seen brief references to Native ancestry in only a few records that discussed surveillance, and that none of the 44 sterilized people whose names had been made public could be classified as Abenaki. Whitting says eugenics was deplorable with how it targeted the poor. He adds that there is evidence some family members of Vermont-recognized Abenaki groups may have been surveyed for possible sterilization, but not because they were Abenaki.
If you were a poor French Canadian in Vermont, you were more likely to be in these institutions in the eugenics survey.
However, of the 256 people who were sterilized over 3 decades, over 200 of them have yet to be identified due to Vermont privacy laws. The state of Vermont has apologized for its role in the eugenics movement, although the 2019 resolution uses some verbal gymnastics, saying they apologize to persons whose extended families' successor generations now identify as Abenaki.
We have grievances with the state of Vermont and their policy of state recognition of 4 tribes that claim to be Abenaki.
In 2022, while in Montreal to do a talk, the governor of Vermont was presented a letter by Jacques Watceau asking to meet regarding the state recognition of the 4 groups in Vermont.
We will take a look at this. The legislature will be reflecting on this, and if they see fit to change the law, they can.
Since then, the governor has officially declined to meet with Odanak. Jacques Watceau says if nothing else, the state should rescind recognition for its own citizens' sake.
They are claiming that history that is not theirs. And it's very frustrating because a lot of people are trying to do good. The white settlers are trying to do good with the past and trying to heal this past. And these individuals, they took our place in history.
The 4 state-recognized Abenaki groups have recently received property tax breaks. They are allowed to market arts and crafts as Indigenous made. And they have several registered charities, some with budgets in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
These are all items that came out of our area here.
Stephen says it isn't a lot of money when considering it's earmarked for services for several thousand people.
We get our funds, if we get them from donations and grants that are here, which are eligible by any nonprofit who applies for them. We don't have a stipend that the government pays us for being chief like they do in Canada.
The state of Vermont has not responded to our interview requests.
We're only asking for those rights to go to those who rightfully deserve it.
Now we're at the Abenaki Nation Museum.
Several independently done genealogies have shown that Don Stevens has a distant First Nation ancestor who is not Abenaki.
As people know, the Western Abenaki are part of the Wabanaki Confederacy.
But to say he and other Vermont-recognized Abenaki have no Indigenous allies would be wrong. Members of the Wolastoqiyik Nation have expressed support, and others say Odanak is putting too much emphasis on blood quantum.
In the very beginning of my book, I started, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, am I really an Indian after all?"
Randy Krakowski is a retired academic and author who wrote a book about rediscovering his Native American roots. An enrolled member of the Potawatomi Nation, Krakowski says blood quantum is a colonial tool to erase Indigenous people.
To me, it comes down to a very simple argument, which is a little bit terrifying. And the argument is that being Indigenous is a bit like having a credit card or a can of Campbell's soup. It has an expiration date on it.
Krakowski says that culture isn't just something that is taught, it lies within.
Ancestral memory, cultural memory, can reemerge. I'll give you a biological analogy. Monarch butterflies leave California. They fly south. It takes them 2 generations to get where they're going. 3 generations down, they come back to the exact same place. They don't have a GPS system. They don't have anything other than something that got imprinted in their DNA.
Others say Krakowski is pushing the limits of logic.
Well, I can only water down a glass of milk so much until you got a glass of water.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for your trust and confidence. I will do my best to serve you as chair.
When he's not working to build Abenaki cultural centers, Rich Holshoe is chair of the government-appointed Vermont Commission of Native American Affairs. Not without some controversy. From a genealogy perspective, Holshoe's Native American ancestry is distant. When questioned, he said he is related to the Abenaki through kinship.
Traditional teachings, as I have been taught and as I am learning, show a very different way to be in the world. It's not about locking knowledge down in black and white, and somebody says this and someone says that. All experiences are valid. All realities are valid. There are multiple realities.
The idea of multiple realities seems to be gaining ground in the internet era. One reality, the Vermont-recognized Abenaki work hard to preserve language, share culture, and even have food banks for the less fortunate.
This wampum belt in particular was done when we received recognition.
Another possible reality, they have used claims of indigeneity to obtain hundreds of thousands of dollars, tax breaks, and cultural cachet. Perhaps those realities themselves aren't so important as to who gets to decide the future of what or who is Abenaki.